I came up with the idea for the long ride a few days ago. My friends and I had met up on Friday evening to hang out, share some stories, and, of course, to have a few beers. Before long, I ended up completely plastered. As I sat there, trying my best not to fall off my chair, my friend said something that got the gears in my brain turning, albeit slowly. "I'm sure I can do it," I brought out drunkenly. "Do what?" one of my friends, Alex, asked, turning to me. "What that punchy guy did, the thing Derek just mentioned, but riding the subway back and forth." "It's Pinchon, dude," Derek corrected me with a sigh. "And he didn't do it, he just wrote about it in one of his books." "Yeah, whatever, but I'm sure I can do it too." "I could do it for an entire week," I slurred. "The hell are you even talking about?" "Riding the tram back and forth without getting off," I said. "Why'd you even do that?" "Because I fucking can." "This has got to be the dumbest thing you ever came up with," Derek mumbled. And that's how it started. The next day I woke up with a splitting headache and utterly hungover, but of course I remembered what I'd said, and of course I was set on doing it. When I hit up my friends via WhatsApp and told them I was going to do it, they were less than enthusiastic and didn't even seem to care. I was, however, and I spent the rest of the weekend getting ready for the long ride. I'd spent an entire week on the tram without getting off. Well, almost getting off, I thought, and came up with a simple set of rules, which I promptly shared with my friends in a newly created WhatsApp group. First, no getting off the tram, not to go home, and not to get supplies. The only exception was to go to the toilet, which I only allowed myself to do at one specific station. I also told my friends I'd update them with a short video every hour so they'd know I was still on the tram. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how right my friends were. This really was the dumbest thing I'd ever come up with. Yet I was also very, very excited about what might happen. After what happened today, and what I saw, what else I might see over the course of this week, I decided to share this journey with you guys. This morning at 8 a.m., I entered my tram line of choice, line 4. It was by far the single longest line, going from one end of the city all the way to the other. A single one-way trip lasting roughly an hour and a half. I also made sure to come prepared and stocked up on pretty much anything I might need. I'd gotten my Kindle ready, a couple of books, 3 fully charged power banks, enough food and water to hopefully last me a week, and a single change of clothes just in case. All of this I'd put away in a gigantic camping backpack half the size of a person. In the early morning, the city's trams are as crowded as hell, filled to the brim with people going to work and students on their way to school and university. Having been lucky enough, I found myself a seat and settled down with my giant backpack. Then I put in my headphones and blasted music into my ear to drown out the general bustle all around me. That morning, nothing strange happened, and I was quite happy when the tram grew emptier and more people got off until finally only a dozen remained. For the first time in a long while, I actually looked at my surroundings. The city and the other people on the tram. Usually I was occupied with my phone or my Kindle, yet the first hours of the long ride went by relatively uneventfully. The only thing of note that happened was that an older lady sat down near me when I took out one of my many sandwiches I'd prepared for myself. She ranted on and on about how I wasn't allowed to eat on the tram and pointed at a row of prohibition signs above us. I simply ignored her and continued eating with a slight grin on my face. Before long, she let me be, shaking her head and went away shaking her head and cursing how us young people don't know no manners anymore. Yeah, fuck you too, lady. She was on the tram for another half hour, and for the entire duration she stared daggers at me. Yet, she at least didn't follow through on her promise to inform the driver and have me kicked off. That would have been a rather anticlimactic ending to the long ride, I thought, laughing. The first truly strange thing, and the reason I'm posting this, happened in the afternoon. Even now, though, as I'm typing this out, I'm not really sure what I saw. In the afternoon, the tram filled with people once more. Some are students from the nearby university, others people getting off work, and of course children on their way home after a long day at school. One group in particular caught my interest. It was a group comprising 7 kids, a loud group. They were laughing, yelling at each other, blasting music, and jumping around. I hated them. As I watched them with growing disdain, I noticed that two of them looked exactly the same. Brothers, I reasoned, most likely twins. The behavior of the two, however, couldn't have been more different. One of them was as energetic as the rest, while the other just stood there, not moving at all, watching the rest, who seemed to ignore him entirely. At first I thought nothing of it, but the longer I watched him, the stranger the whole thing felt. Then slowly, ever so slowly, the child's face grew from a dejected, uninterested look to a grin. An almost hungry grin. One directed at his brother. This went on for almost 15 minutes. His friends never even noticed his weird behavior, and similarly, the child never noticed me staring. As much as I told myself he was just a child being a child, I couldn't help but find the entire situation weird. Surreal, even. That face-splitting grin, it wasn't normal. This wasn't what a child should look like. Hell, could look like. I leaned forward, took out my phone, and was about to take a picture when the tram came to a halt. Amongst the general bustle, I lost track of the kids who left the tram, amongst a multitude of other people. Eventually I saw them again, outside at the station. I noticed something right away. By now, there were only 6 of them, not 7. One of the brothers, the twins, was gone. The other just stood out there next to his group of friends, not doing anything. A second later, the tram doors closed. In that instant, the kid's head jerked in my direction. His eyes were wide, his face still distorted by that same twisted grin, and he was staring right at me, and only me. And then, he opened his mouth, wider than should be possible, and jumped forward as if to throw himself through the glass. I cringed back in terror, away from the window, almost toppling over my backpack, and sending a handful of supplies onto the floor of the tram. Within moments, and thanks to a few other helpful passengers, I was quick to pick everything up. When I stared back, however, the kid was gone, and was now hurrying after his group of friends, seemingly without a care in the world. Even now, I don't know what to make of all this. I told myself he was just a kid, just being stupid after he'd noticed me staring at him. That face, however, that mouth. The thing that has me most worried was the number of kids. I knew there had been 7 before, and only 6 of them got off. For long moments, I scanned the interior of the tram, trying to find the missing kid and see if he'd stayed behind on his own. Yet there was no hint of him. He seemed to have vanished. The general bustle of the day soon evened out as afternoon turned into evening, then picked up once more when people set out to hit the bars, or to meet up with friends. I nodded off at about 11 in the evening. I was jerked awake long past 2 in the morning, when I was almost pulled off my seat. When I opened my eyes, I found myself face to face with some asshole who tried to take a hold of my backpack. I was no idiot, though. Before I'd gone to sleep, I made sure to carefully wrap the backpack strap around my arm. For a few seconds, the guy just stared at me, a dumbfounded look on his face before he realized what was going on. A moment later, when the tram came to a stop, he rushed away and went outside. I could only stare at him. The fucker had just tried to steal my shit. After he was gone, I checked the backpack's contents to make sure none of them were gone. Then I took out my phone and typed this all out. Now I'm just sitting here, trying to catch some sleep. If I witness any other strange things, or something else of interest happens, I'll keep you all updated. Well, the second day of my little journey is over. The one I came to call the long ride. And boy, do I have a few things to tell you. Things took a turn for the worse, but more on that later. After sitting in a tram for over 24 hours, I realized just how beautiful my city truly is. It's breathtaking, full of old architecture, nice little parks, and a riverside panorama few other cities can compare to. That morning, I actually took my very first toilet break. I don't know how I lasted that long, but let me tell you, the moment I went, it was heaven. The early hours of the day went by as usual. Once again, the tram was overcrowded, and a few times I noticed people staring at me angrily for not getting off my seat or at least moving my giant backpack aside. Well, tough luck. This row is my home for this entire week. Before you ask, yes, I specifically chose where I sat. Second tram car, third row from the back. The first interesting thing to happen that day was an encounter with an older man. He must have entered the tram between 9 and 10 in the morning. I only remember because I had just taken another short video for my friends, and when I looked back up from the phone, there he was, sitting only a few rows ahead of me. It seemed almost as if he'd just appeared from nowhere. Must have snuck in at the last stop, I reasoned. Surely enough, he just sat there as the tram continued on to the end of the line station, and remained seated as the tram turned around and went back the way it came from. I couldn't help but smile a little, but was also a bit confused. Were there other people who did the same dumb thing I was doing? Just riding the tram back and forth for no reason? Well, who knows? Maybe he's just a bored old man with nothing to do. Maybe he just enjoys tram rides or the scenery, or hell, he doesn't mind getting on the tram early and taking a brief detour before reaching his destination. I tried not to be bothered by him, but whenever I looked up from my book, he was still there, going back and forth and back again with me. As I munched on another sandwich and some crackers, I couldn't help but stare at the back of his head. It was 2 p.m, and by now he must have been on the tram for at least 4 hours, so what the hell was he doing? I'm not gonna lie, he unnerved me a little bit. A few minutes later, he got up, and I breathed a sigh of relief, thinking he was about to get off. Instead, he came and took a seat near me, and turned his bald head towards me. I noticed that something was wrong with him. His eyes looked glassy, almost hazy. The weirdest part, however, was his outfit. It just didn't fit. Not on his body, I mean, but in the 21st century. It reminded me of something I'd once seen in an old family photo album, a style popular multiple decades ago, long even before the reunion. "Interesting to see someone here for as long as me," he finally said. I just stared at him, surprised by the gentle, well-meaning tone of his voice. "Oh yeah, I guess it's a dare between friends, to see how long I can last." "Young people these days," he mused. "But I sure did my share of stupid things back in my days." "How come you're on so long by yourself? You enjoying the ride, the scenery?" He was quiet, and for a few moments he just stared outside, watching the city pass by. "Well, you aren't wrong, young man. I've been on here for quite some time. Longer than I'd even have guessed. But it's interesting to see things change. New lines, new stations. Feels like just yesterday that I rode on line 5 to the main station." What he just said made no sense. There was no line 5. Sure, there'd been one, but it was discontinued over 2 decades ago. Wasn't line 5 discontinued? "Oh, yes, you're right. Once you've been here for as long as me, you sometimes forget these types of things." How long have you been here? For some reason, I suddenly felt cold. Something didn't add up. Not just his hazy eyes or his outfit, but the things he said. "Much too long, young man, but that's just how it is for some of us. We can ride on, but we'll never reach our destination." The hell's that supposed to... "You should be careful, young man. This place, like any others, has its dangers, especially for those who stay on for too long," he said, getting up. I said nothing. I could only watch as he walked on and entered the tram car ahead of me. Then, for a single second, what I saw changed. It was only for the blink of an eye, but it made me cringe in terror, and I felt myself break into a cold sweat. What had been a nicely dressed older man before me now turned into a mangled, twisted corpse. Its upper body was caved in, almost torn apart. Its arms were dangling at its sides, broken entirely. The worst, however, were its legs. They were nothing but a mass of ground flesh and bone. Then it was over, and once again I saw nothing but an old man. He turned to me once more, a well-knowing, sad look on his face, before he gave me a little nod as if to say, "Be careful." Right at that moment my phone vibrated, notifying me about a new message. I jerked and almost dropped it before I turned back towards the old man, or rather where he'd been. He was gone. I scanned the train ahead of me, then behind me, but I saw nothing. He just vanished. I couldn't help but shiver. What the hell had just happened? I thought about the mangled, twisted version of him I'd seen, the things he talked about. Had I just been visited by a freaking ghost? For the rest of the day, I couldn't stop thinking about him. In the afternoon, the tram filled up again, then emptied out before the process repeated itself in the evening. As it turned late, I settled back in my seat, put on some low music, and prepared myself for another couple hours of rest, hopefully a few more than yesterday. As I sat there, I watched the other few late-night passengers on the tram with me. In my mind, I gave them names and made up stories about them. Right there, a few seats ahead of me, sat Jenny, a young woman in her mid-20s who was on her way home after a late-night shift at the nursing home. Further ahead sat old Rupert, a bachelor in his early 60s who just enjoyed a performance at the State Theater with a group of friends. It was strange, but I almost felt a connection with these people, as if they were my people, the citizens of Tramonia, a nation comprising nothing but this one lone tram going back and forth forever. A few minutes later, a group of guys got on, guys who were clearly drunk. They were a loud, rowdy bunch, walking up and down the tram car, howling obscenities and dangling from handrails like the idiots they were. Almost unconsciously, I felt myself drawn to them, and couldn't help but watch them. They were breaking the laws of Tramonia, I thought, and would need to be punished. As I sat there, half nodding off, staring at them, I tried to come up with ideas on how Tramonia would handle crime, and how those who'd committed them would be punished. I didn't realize that one of them had long noticed me staring at them. His expression wasn't normal. Not one of mild curiosity. No, he looked pissed. Or at least up for trouble. "The fuck are you staring at, asshole?" he called out to me. I jerked up in my seat, averting my eyes, but I could already hear them coming my way. Oh shit, now I'd done it. "Yo, bro, what's up?" one of them brought out as he sat down in front of me. I didn't say a thing, and instead tried my best to ignore them. "Hey, we're talking to you," his friend spat at me. "Nothing, just on my way home." "Oh yeah, is that so?" the one in front of me said in a sing-song voice. I gave him another yeah and tried my best to stare at the window. This promptly landed me a slap against the back of my head. "What the fuck are you—" I couldn't even finish the curse because one of them grabbed me by the throat, raising his fist. "You think you can fuck with us, asshole?" Right at that moment, the driver's voice could be heard via the intercom, telling them to knock it off. The guys stared at each other in surprise, but didn't move, and neither did they release me. A second announcement by the driver followed soon after, this one more serious. He assured them he was ready to stop the tram here and now and call the cops should they not back down immediately. Finally, I was released, and after throwing me another set of insults, the three of them walked away. A few stations later, they thankfully got off the tram for good, but not without sending me a few more angry glances. When we pulled into the end of the line station, a place where trams would occasionally power down during the late hours of the night, the driver approached me. "Hey there, not to bother you, but I've noticed you've been on the tram for quite a while. What exactly are you up to?" "Well, I'm trying to get home, but..." "You've been trying to get home for the past 5 hours?" Shit, he got me. Alright, no. To be honest, it's a bet, I started, giving him an embarrassed little laugh. He raised his eyebrows, waiting for me to continue. "I told my friends I'd be able to stay on the tram for an entire week without getting off." For a moment, he just stared at me, then furrowed his brow before he spoke again. "That's the dumbest frickin' thing I ever heard," he said, shaking his head. "Yeah, it really is," I agreed. "Well, not like I can kick you off or something like this. You got a ticket on you, right?" "Sure, yeah. Got myself a weekly pass just for the long ride." Once more, he raised his eyebrows, and I was quick to tell him it was the name I came up with. "Well, it's dumb, really frickin' dumb, but as long as you don't cause any trouble, that's it. Just try to stay clear of the guys like the ones before." "Sure thing, boss." With that, the conversation was over, and the driver went outside to have a smoke or two. About half an hour later, the tram started up again, and the ride continued. Well, that's day number 2, guys. I'll see y'all tomorrow. After last night's encounter with the group of thugs, I was quite shaken. I didn't know, however, what day 3 would hold in store for me. I still kept to my people watching, and I still made up stories about my few lonely companions during the quieter hours, but not in an overly obvious and annoying fashion. That's how I came to notice a certain woman. She was middle-aged, wore a long skirt and a blue woolen sweater, and kept her hair tied in a ponytail. At first glance, there was nothing wrong with her or her behavior. She was just another normal passenger, getting on the tram at point A and getting off at point B. Things turned strange, however, when I noticed her entering the tram again at a later station further along the line. At first I thought I was mistaken, and my eyes were playing tricks on me. This was a big city. Many people lived here, and I was sure some of them looked similar. Yet as I watched her, I noticed the same skirt, the same sweater, and even the ponytail. No, this was, without a doubt, the same person. This was impossible. How in the hell had she gotten there within 10 minutes, a good kilometer from where she'd gotten off? I couldn't help but shiver as I watched her getting off again a few stations later, and felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up when she re-entered the tram yet again, after a good 15. In total, she entered the tram on 7 entirely different locations throughout the city in about an hour and a half. She was, however, not the only one. There were others like her, almost a dozen in total. One was an older man, about 50 years of age. He wore a suit, carried a briefcase, and I saw him a total of 5 times. Some were children. Just laughing children who entered the tram on their own, then left it, and then entered it again a few stations later. They only ever appeared when the tram was empty or almost empty. At least that's when I caught sight of them. Whenever I did, however, I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Yet they did nothing strange, never looked at me or even approached me, they just rode the tram. At one point, my eyes met those of an older woman during her 4th iteration, as I came to call it, but she didn't even bat an eye and gave me no attention at all. Still, this was one of the most unsettling things I'd noticed so far, and I tried my best to stay clear of these people. Another strange passenger was a young man dressed entirely in black. I first noticed him in the early evening hours. He entered the tram and stayed on it just like I did. For long hours, he just sat there in the same seat. At times, he stared outside, but at others, he watched the people around him, and occasionally I even found him staring my way. When he did, an unexplainable wave of fear washed over me, and I couldn't help but squirm in my seat. He gave me the feeling of being a trapped animal, of being prey. The reason was his face. He wasn't merely staring, but grinning. Always grinning, a comically wide grin that almost divided his face. He wasn't grinning at anyone, however. Instead, he seemed to just grin to himself. It was the strangest thing. At one point, I watched as he leaned forward, pushing his face so close to the woman sitting next to him it almost touched hers. I noticed how uncomfortable she was, but she never spoke up. She just sat there, squirming in her seat nervously, almost as if she didn't see the guy. She was, however, far from his only victim. He did the same to countless other passengers, and none of them called him out on his behavior. The longer this went on, the longer I watched what he was doing, the more often I found him staring at me. As much as I told myself to ignore him, to not attract attention, I just couldn't. I was driven by the strangest sense of curiosity. This guy, whoever he was or whatever he was just wrong. It was shortly past midnight when I noticed the change. For the first time, the guy wasn't grinning to himself anymore. No. Now he was grinning right at me. I saw how he leaned forward in his seat, his hands on his seat, as if he was about to push himself upward at any moment. I tried my best to stare outside, to ignore him, but whenever I took a sideways glance, he was still there, still grinning at me, and each time his grin seemed to have grown wider. Eventually, when I couldn't take it anymore, I was about to get up, to leave my trusty row of seats behind and flee to the back of the tram. And then I stopped. The strangest of feelings washed over me, one that told me I should stay right where I was. Somehow I knew that if I were to get up right now, he'd get me. It sounds ridiculous, but I knew. I saw the anticipation on his face, the way his feet shuffled over the ground and his posture, ready to pounce on me the moment I got up. Finally, after half an hour of this game of sitting duck had passed, he just got up and left the tram. Outside, he simply walked off without so much as looking back at me. Even now, I've got no clue what the hell was wrong with that guy. Maybe he was just some asshole trying to fuck with me, but somehow, I feel he was something far worse. Yet as terrifying as this half-hour encounter was, it wouldn't be the most terrifying thing I'd witness on day 3. It was later that night, as I sat in my seat, unable to fall asleep, that I noticed the first change in scenery. I told myself it was because it was nighttime and because of the darkness. But I'd ridden this damn tram for 2.5 days by now. I knew the area it passed through. Hell, I knew what buildings were at what station. Station 17, a giant mall. Station 44, an old hardware store, and so on. Yet that night I occasionally saw new areas that were different. At one point, the tram passed through a street which was lined by nothing but giant derelict tower blocks. Before long, even the tram tracks themselves seemed to deteriorate. The tram rambled on through this forlorn area, shaking slightly without ever stopping at any station. We must have been there for at least 10 minutes without ever stopping at a station, which I know is impossible. On the way back, we never passed that area again, almost as if it never existed. At other times, the tram took bends and went around corners that shouldn't be there, and drove on through constricted, half-hidden streets and alleys that seemed almost too small for it to pass through. Whenever we reached one of these strange places, I couldn't help but stare outside, strangely curious about them. Some streets were so narrow the tram was only a few inches away from the walls of the building, allowing me to steal glances through open doors and windows. What I saw was utterly surreal, and made me question if I was even awake at all, or if all of this was nothing but a weird dream, conjured by 2 nights of barely catching any sleep and perpetually being stuck in a tram. In one window I was greeted by 4 people. They weren't just inside their apartment, but were leaning out the window, their faces almost pressed against the passing tram. Their eyes were empty, their faces without any emotion. Yet, when they were right beside me, I couldn't help but inch away from the tram's windows, afraid they might do something. In another window, one belonging to a tiny, inconspicuous building, I saw a giant hall that seemed without end. I saw only the floor, but no walls or ceiling. It just continued on endlessly, and was much, much too large for the building that contained it. Yet, from the far back, off in the darkness of the most distant parts of that hall, I thought I saw eyes watching me. Eventually, the tram approached a station in one such area and then came to a halt. Outside, I saw a strange figure. At first, I thought it was a drunk person, or maybe someone disabled given their strange posture and gait. Then my eyes adjusted, and I realized something was entirely wrong with that figure. It was some sort of deformed thing. Its limbs were bent at strange angles, seemed to have too many joints in them and sprouted from places they shouldn't. As the tram stood there, its crooked head slightly tilted in my direction. Then its head pushed forward, its neck stretching further and further, much further than should have been possible. Sweat broke out all over my body as I found the ghastly creature measuring me up and down. This time, it wasn't just fear that came over me, but full-on panic. My body started shaking uncontrollably, and I had to cling to the seat in front of me to somehow keep the panic at bay, to not freak out completely at the surreal sight outside. Slowly, the thing moved, approached the tram door on its long, spidery limbs, and I already saw it entering the tram, coming for me. As it took these few steps, I hoped, prayed it would stay where it was. I think in the state I was in, I spoke, probably yelled those words repeatedly through the empty tram. until thankfully the doors closed and we left the waking nightmare behind. For the next few minutes, I just sat in my seat, my eyes closed, my knees below my chin and rocking back and forth like a scared little child. Eventually, when I opened my eyes again, all was normal, and the tram continued on its usual route, and did so for the rest of the night. By now, it's early morning. I haven't been able to sleep yet. I couldn't. Whenever I was about to doze off, I was afraid I'd end up at some unfamiliar, surreal location again, and this time the creature would actually enter the tram. Instead, I spent the last hour typing this all out to calm myself down. To be honest, I thought about giving up, to just get off and call it quits after what had happened, but then I thought about it. I was on day 3, day frickin' 3. If I stopped now, my friends would never let it go. Most important of all, however, as scary as these experiences were, they were also strangely fascinating. If I got off now, I'd probably regret it, and wonder what else I might have seen on the long ride. So I guess I'll keep going for a while longer. I'll see you all tomorrow. Hello there, everyone. Day 4 is officially over, and it was a strange one, to say the least. It was, however, similarly terrifying as the day prior, for various reasons. As I said, I haven't slept, and even after I'd typed out the day's events, I wasn't able to. Before long, the first people on their way to work entered the tram, and I damn well knew I wouldn't get the chance to catch some sleep for the next hour or two. And so, before things grew too crowded, I set out for another toilet break, and also to change my clothes. I might be a bit of a weirdo, or hell, an idiot for doing this long ride, but I try to at least not look and smell like a freaking hobo. It didn't take long, and once I'd pushed my used clothes to the bottom of my backpack, I set out for the tram again. Needless to say, it was packed by this point, but I knew it wouldn't last forever. Once the tram approached the city's outskirts, I could finally return to my trusty row of seats. Once there, I put in my headphones, turned on some lo-fi chill mix, and settled down for some sleep. I guess I really was exhausted because I promptly slept through the rest of the morning and almost the entire early afternoon. When I woke up, I had a stiff neck and a painfully twisted back. Those damn tram seats really weren't comfortable. I cursed at myself for not investing in a travel pillow. It was around 4 in the morning, after another one of my short, hourly updates, when my friend Derek hit me up. He asked if I was fucking with him by posting old videos or if I was still at it. I assured him I was. After all, I told him, I set out to do this for an entire week. I mentioned, however, I'd see how it goes, given certain things that had happened. When he asked me what I meant, I thought about telling him what I'd seen last night, but there was no way he'd believe me. He said he was out in the city right now, and asked when I'd pass our city's central mall. After a quick check, I told him I'd be there in about an hour. He was quick to tell me he'd join me for a couple of stations and see how I was holding up. The moment he said this, I got an idea. Sure, I still had some sandwiches left, but to be honest, I was getting sick and tired of the same ham and cheese ones by now, so I asked Derek if he could get me a few supplies. He told me to just get off the damn tram and get them myself, but I told him that would be breaking the rules. Then I offered to pay him double for anything he'd bring me. We ended up exchanging a few more messages before he yielded and said he'd do it. I thanked him profusely before I gave him the time my tram would arrive at the mall station. And wouldn't you know it, there he was, holding 2 shopping bags in his hands. He noticed me the moment the tram arrived and sat down in the row in front of me. "You know you're a freaking idiot, right?" Derek said, laughing. "You really set on doing this for an entire week? Why?" I shrugged. Made it halfway already, so I can't call it quits now. "This really is the dumbest thing you've ever done. Also, you look like shit, dude." "Can't sleep for shit on a tram, you know?" "Well, duh, idiot," he said, shaking his head before he handed me the grocery bags. The first bag contained an assortment of snacks, some canned food, and even a few vegetables. When he handed me the second one, my eyes grew wide. It was full of cans, too, but the best kind. Beer. When I stared at him, he gave me a shrug. "Thought you'd want to have a drink every once in a while." Sure do, man. Sure do. After the shit I've seen? He raised his eyebrows, but I gave him a dismissive gesture. It's nothing. Well, I gotta go. Still got a ton of things to do, and not everyone can keep doing stupid shit all day. You know, some of us got jobs and all, he said, giving me a wink. Yeah, whatever, man, I said, laughing and giving him the finger. He left, and the next station I was on my own again. Gotta say, it felt damn good to actually talk to someone. Most of the long ride was pretty damn boring. I guess today would be slightly different, though, I thought as I pulled out the first of many beer cans. It was late in the afternoon anyway, so I might as well have some fun. Now, there's a rule against getting plastered on the tram, and technically against drinking at all, but no one really cares to enforce it. So, cheers and bottoms up. I did my best to be as inconspicuous as possible, but I still noticed a few glances from people here and there, especially the hard-working, productive members of society on their way home from work, who couldn't help but frown at the idiot happily drinking his beer at 5 p.m. Yeah, I felt guilty. As the evening progressed and I got drunker, I noticed strange things again. Same as the day before. I noticed the same people getting on and off the tram at various stations. Some I'd seen before, others I hadn't. They all crept me out, even in my drunken state. The tram also passed weird places again. It felt almost as if the longer I was on, the more consecutive hours I spent huddled in the same place, the more my reality wavered and the more surreal it became. The first one was a giant playground, one much bigger than any I'd seen before. The tram rose past it for almost an entire minute. I saw a giant steel climbing frame that rose into the sky, and I saw an entire small town comprising nothing but wooden forts, ladders, and slides. It was nothing short of surreal. Even stranger, though, even now, in the dark of the night, the place was still populated by a multitude of kids. A shiver went down my spine as I watched the goings-on out there, and I was more than relieved when we finally left the place behind. I saw the next unreal location, or unlocation, as I had come to call them, about an hour later. The tram made its way through the alternative part of town and rode past bars and clubs before it eventually approached a building I'd never seen before. The tram rode towards it before it began snaking around the place. Holding my can of beer, I stared at it in fascination. The place was exclusively lit by red lights and covered in an assortment of signs, proclaiming it to be the destination of dreams, the place to be for the night. And above it all, the name Club Red sprouted from the wall in giant neon letters. The entire building was filled to the brim with people, even on a Thursday evening. As we drove past it, I could hear music, but not just any music. It was a strangely warped, droning type of music, one you might call psychedelic, but it felt almost too random for that. It was nothing but an assortment of sounds, something trying to have a melody but somehow wasn't able to get it right. As I continued staring at the building, my eyes began to hurt. At first I thought it was the red light, but the longer I focused on it, I realized it was the building itself. Things just didn't add up. I don't know how to explain it, but the layout just didn't make sense. I stared at the windows, one after another, but there were too many. Too many to fit the front of the building. It was the strangest sensation. Imagine a building whose ground floor comprises nothing but 4 giant windows. Now imagine the floor above has 7. 7 windows of exactly the same size and equally spaced as the ones below. It shouldn't work. It should be impossible, yet there they were. It was the strangest optical illusion I'd ever come upon, and when I saw it, my brain couldn't handle it, couldn't understand this warping of the laws of physics. In all these windows, I saw people. They were pushing and shoving against each other. Some were dancing, others leaning outward, and here and there I even saw some sitting on the windowsills. The building's size, too, made no sense. It wasn't big, nothing more than a handful of floors. At least, I thought so at first. The moment we were closer, I stared upward, and I could always find yet another floor above the one I was looking at. Each one of them became more and more surreal, bigger and covered in more details, sprouting more windows. I even saw balconies, bridges connecting different parts of the building, and staircases that snaked around the building's outer walls and led up and down, in and out. It was an amalgamation of architectural impossibilities. The people, too, as well as what they were doing, became stranger the longer I watched. At first, it seemed to be normal people, partying, but then I saw strange figures doing it right there in the windows or on the balconies, their forms as twisted as the building they were in. At one point, I even saw what I assumed to be some sort of ghastly ritual or sacrifice. Finally, I came upon rows and rows of seats, chiseled in the building's front, reminding me of a concert hall or a stadium. It was packed to the brim with people. Distorted people. They were all watching the street below, the tram, and maybe even me. They seemed to go crazy about it, applauding, laughing, and pointing as we rode by. Each time we rounded a corner, I thought we'd be done, and would finally leave this impossibility of a building behind. But we didn't. At first I thought we were circling it, but each corner greeted me with yet another part of it, each one stranger than the last. And in each one, more twisted and deprived things were happening. Eventually, I just couldn't handle it anymore. My head was hurting too much. I turned and watched the other side of the street. All the while, the building's dim, red light still flooded the tram. And then, in the blink of an eye, it was over. The red light was gone, so was the music, and the tram continued on its normal course. I turned around and stared back, but all I saw was a long, straight road, one that led through the city's alternative area. All I saw were the same well-known clubs and bars. I know I should have been unsettled, should have been freaking out, but somehow I was almost used to the strangeness of these unlocations by now. Or I might have been too drunk. A few minutes later, I took up my phone, and I looked for a place called Club Red. But I already knew what I'd find. Nothing. There was no sign of any such club ever having existed in my city, and to be honest, I was more than happy about it. Finally, I settled down in my seat, turned up my music, continued on my beer before I drifted off to sleep. When I woke up, I felt slightly hungover, but still pleasantly buzzed. My neck was in terrible pain yet again. I cursed and rubbed it for a good minute before I shrugged and decided to have another beer. Who knows, maybe it would help me get to sleep again. It was only when I opened that can that I realized the tram wasn't empty anymore. No, it was packed. As if this wasn't strange enough, the tram was entirely quiet. No one was speaking. No one was moving. Everyone was just sitting in their seats, unmoving and staring straight ahead. I knew instantly that something was wrong. I felt cold sweat break out all over my body. For a moment, I just sat there trying to hide my presence. But then, drunken curiosity won over fear. I turned my head to see the person sitting in the row next to mine. What I saw made me freeze. Not normal. This was not a normal person. What I saw was a face that was undescriptive. It almost looked like a blank slate, as if someone had forgotten to add all the characteristics and details that made someone a human being. Even though the person was only about a meter away from me, I couldn't tell if they were a man or a woman, or if they were human at all. My drunken eyes were wandering over the rest of the passengers near me, and I realized they were all the same. All of them were empty, for lack of a better word. Even in my drunken state, even though I downed 9 beers over the course of the night, fear washed over me. Seeing these weird things outside was one thing. You felt strangely safe inside the tram, protected by its mighty steel chassis. But now what was happening was inside as well. I felt very, very vulnerable and very afraid. I began shuddering and had to will myself to be quiet, to not move. What the fuck even were these things, and why were they here? Once more, my eyes darted around, but then I told myself to stop. Do nothing. Just sit here and wait till they are all gone or get off the tram. Don't let them notice you. If they do, if they realize you are here, they might... No, stop. Calm down. I put one of my hands on my knees to stop the leg from shaking. With the other one, I clutched onto the beer like a safety anchor and continued drinking, or tried the best I could. Then I turned to look outside to watch my city pass by. To be honest, I expected to find another unlocation outside, and that I'd ended up at another different place, the place these things belong to. This time, however, the outside was just empty. There was no city at all. All I saw was undescriptive ground. It was as empty as all the people around me. Another indescript blank slate. Where the hell was I? How did I end up in a place like this? When I saw the tram approaching a tunnel, I started shaking again. At this point, I almost lost it and freaked the hell out. This didn't feel like the other unlocations before. This felt different. So far, there was one thing that had never changed. The tram was always outdoors, no matter how much of its surroundings had changed. But now, I wondered if this was the end. If this tunnel would just swallow me up to never return. I cursed at myself to stop once more. Just go back to sleep or wait until it's morning. And yet I couldn't. All I could do was to watch as the tunnel's dark, dilapidated walls passed by me. Then, after long minutes, the tram left the tunnel behind and we arrived at a station, if you can even call it that. It was a quiet, unrefined place. There were no lights, no details, no maps or departure schedule. It was nothing but a single, nondescript platform. Yet the moment the tram stopped and opened its doors, all the strange, undescriptive people got to their feet and in unison filled out of the tram. After only a minute, I was alone. I stared outside and watched as they all walked away and vanished into the dark of night. It wasn't long before the tram's driver, a different one than the one I'd spoken to before, approached me. He hurried through the tram's cars, his face distorted by a mixture of fear and confusion. "We made it, sir," he brought out in a shaken voice. "This is the end. You've got to go. You got to get off. You've reached your destination." For a moment, I just stared at him. Then, towards the tram doors and the dark, undescriptive plain outside, and shivered. "No, I can't. I've got to get back to the city. Whatever this place is, I don't belong here." I almost screamed at him in my drunken state. When he heard my voice, the man stumbled back. Then, he measured me up and down, saw my backpack and the can of beer I was holding. A few seconds later, he just nodded, and without another word, he headed back to the driver's cabin. We stayed at this strange station for a while longer, and I could feel the driver watching me via the tram's security camera the entire time. I don't know what this place was. I don't know how I ended up here, but I knew I shouldn't have. It was a place not on any map. A place that couldn't be reached, and yet it was still there. It was a place even further detached from reality than all of those other unlocations I'd come upon before. Or maybe I was just too goddamn drunk. With that, I opened up beer number 10, settled back in my seat, and like clockwork, the tram's doors closed and we drove on. After only 10 minutes, we were back in the regular city. It was an instantaneous change, and one that I missed entirely. One moment I was staring at the same undescriptive plain outside, and then suddenly I stared at buildings once more. I breathed a sigh of relief, and finally I began to drunkenly type this all out. It took longer than usual, almost 2 hours, and by now the morning bustle has already begun. My head hurts, both from drinking and the noise of the people around me, but also from trying to understand what I've seen tonight. Either way, that's it for today. See you all tomorrow. I know there's more weird shit to come. The long ride continues, and I'm sure the weirdness does as well. Trying to catch up on some sleep now. Wish me luck, guys. Hey there, everyone. I officially made it through day 5 of the long ride. Quite a few things happened today, but while some of them were strange and terrifying, I also had a rather interesting conversation with a fellow passenger. Still trying to figure out what to make of it, though. The morning started fantastic right off the bat. After I'd typed out the events of the previous night, I felt like utter shit. I was hungover. The tram was overcrowded, and the collective noise of all those people cut through my brain like a searing knife. Eventually, though, I just didn't care anymore. I pulled out one of the remaining 2 cans of beer my friend had gotten me, and decided to down them, hoping they'd somehow be able to ease my hangover and allow me to sleep. Needless to say, people weren't too happy about it. As I said, no one cares to enforce the no drinking on the tram rule, but that didn't mean people were happy to see you drinking in the early morning hours. I opened my can of hangover cure beer, took a deep sip, and could already feel the pain in my brain receding. I leaned back, took a deep breath, and then another sip. This behavior didn't go unnoticed, of course. I saw the stares, and I could almost hear the whispers, but really I couldn't care less. I was just too damn exhausted. It wasn't long before I felt someone's hand resting on my shoulder. When I turned, I saw an older man. His attire screamed blue collar. He was staring me down, waiting for me to take out my headphones. The moment I did, he spoke up. "Drinking first thing in the morning, eh? But not even moving the damn backpack to make room for other people." I just looked at him, and was about to give him a fuck you, but he wasn't the only one laying into me. "There are children here, you know. Can't you at least think about what an example you're setting for them?" An older woman chimed in. "How about you just move the damn backpack and get up? Maybe standing for a bit might sober you up." Mr. Blue Collar spat at me. Without waiting for an answer, he got hold of my backpack and was about to pull it off the seat. I was quick to hold it in place with my free hand. This time, I said it out loud. "Fuck off, okay?" He didn't like me mouthing off one bit, and this time, he pulled on the backpack with all the force he could muster. The backpack slid off the seat, and I was promptly pulled after it. In the process, I spilt a good part of the beer all over myself. I cursed, only to be greeted by snickering and more whispers all around me. "Already drunk at this time of the day," I heard a middle-aged lady say. "Probably homeless and slept on the train," someone else added. "Just kick him off," I heard a teenager say to his friends, who enthusiastically agreed with this idea. "Fucking hell, all right," I finally said, and got up from my seat. Then I got a hold of my backpack and pushed myself through the more than annoyed crowd of passengers to find myself some room. As I did, it felt like the entire tram was staring at me. Occasionally, people moved out of my way, their disgust at my drunken self visible on their faces, while others weren't shy to elbow me or push me aside, trying to provoke yet another scene. Eventually, I made it to a spot near the tram doors, and pushed myself against the side of the tram and began massaging my temples. I still heard people whisper and still felt the glances. Yeah, you can all go fuck yourselves, I thought. Yet some weren't just satisfied by mere whispers and glances. When the group of teenagers from before got off the tram, they all bumped into me, one of them so hard I almost lost my footing. In an instant, I jerked around and pushed the fucker. He tumbled off the tram and promptly crashed to the floor. He got up a second later and was about to throw a punch, but then froze. His eyes grew wide. Fear distorted his face, and he cringed back, just staring at me. He opened his mouth, but then closed it again. His friends asked him why he didn't punch the fucker, but he wasn't able to say anything. Now, I'm sure I look like shit, probably like a homeless person, but that reaction, that fear, it wasn't normal. I don't know what he saw. Maybe it was me, or maybe it was something else, but it made me more than anxious. I just stood there as the tram doors closed again. Could it be that whatever otherworldly influences I'd been subjected to had done something to me? Before I could think about it any longer, the same man from before was yelling at me again, telling me he had no problem to kick my drunk ass off the train if I ever did something like that again. Eventually, more and more people left the tram, Mr. Blue Collar amongst them. He gave me one last angry stare before he got off. As he did, I heard him mumble something to himself about worthless scum. Soon enough, only a handful of people remained, and I could finally return to my trusty row of seats. I considered opening the last can of beer I had left, but I could tell the driver had it out for me because of the earlier commotion. Unless I didn't want to get kicked off for real, I better lie low for a bit. So instead, I decided to just settle down, close my eyes, and catch some sleep. I was awoken in the late afternoon by the sound of someone knocking against the tram window. I jerked up, turned, but saw no one. Great, I thought. Probably a bunch of kids who were fucking with me. And then I saw him. There was a guy who stood a couple meters away on the other side of the street. He was staring at me. His face showed a slight, cheeky smile, as if he just played a trick on me. And, as if to make it even clearer, he made a little knocking motion. So it had been him, but how? How would he be able to knock against the glass from over there? I mean, there was no way he'd been fast enough to knock and then cross the street. My eyes continued to rest on him until the tram drove off. The moment it did, his smile grew a tad bit wider, and he slowly raised his hand to wave at me. I don't know why, but he instantly crept me out. The hell was wrong with that guy? I shook my head. No, don't think about it. It's probably just some idiot who saw me waking up and decided to fuck with me. At least, that's what I told myself until we arrived at the next station. I'd just been sitting there, staring outside, but the moment we pulled in, I noticed a person waving. At first, I thought it was someone waving at a friend or one of the other passengers, but then I recognized him. It was the same guy. The same freaking guy from the last station. How he'd gotten here was anyone's guess. He was still smiling happily, but now he seemed to have gotten a tad bit closer to the tram. By now, I should have gotten used to these strange events, and I should have just ignored it. Hell, seen it as a normal part of my day, but I just couldn't. I don't know why, but him looking entirely normal, his smile non-threatening, was so much worse than any of the ghastly grins I'd seen so far. I told myself once more to look away, to ignore him, to focus on my music, but I found myself staring at him. Finally, we drove off again, and once more he waved at me, his eyes trailing after me. When we pulled into the next station, I somehow knew he'd be there. We were still a good 100 meters away, but I could already see him waiting for me. And as the tram pulled in, he waved at me again. Once more, he seemed to have gotten closer. I couldn't help but squirm in my seat. That freaking smile. Every time the tram pulled into a new station, that guy was there. And every time he was doing the same thing, happily smiling and waving at me. I'd seen lots of weird shit, but this was just too bizarre. And then I did it. After more than a dozen stations, I just couldn't take it anymore. I raised my hand and waved back at him, just to see if anything would happen, if anything would change. The moment I did, there was indeed a change. His hand went down. His eyes grew wide. His smile grew bigger. And then, after staring at me for another few seconds, he just left. A wave of fear like no other washed over me, and I started shivering. I don't know what I'd just done, but I knew I'd made a mistake, a huge fucking mistake. As I sat there, shaking in my seat, I couldn't help but stare outside, stare at the internal departure schedule to see when we'd pull into the next station. What if that guy was there again? What if he was waiting for me? Or hell, what if he got on the tram to come for me? Just because I reacted to him. Then the announcement of the next station was broadcast over the internal speaker by a friendly yet monotonous voice. I froze. There he was. At least I thought so at first, but then I realized I was wrong. It was another person, another man just waiting for the tram. That waving guy wasn't there. Yet, as I sat in my seat, I knew this wasn't over. I knew he'd be back eventually. Slowly, ever so slowly, afternoon turned to evening. Friday evening, which meant the tram would be packed the entire night. I watched as teenagers and older people alike flooded into the tram. I saw guys dressed in suits, girls in short skirts and knee-highs, older ladies in classy dresses, and even a group of guys in sweatpants, carrying 2 caskets of beer. Almost the entire city was out to party tonight. The later it got, and the more alcohol people seemed to have consumed, the more excitable they became. Here was a group of drunks bellowing a raunchy song through half the tram. Over there was a couple making out. And further ahead, I saw a group of girls so scarcely clad you might think it was the middle of summer. I even saw 2 older gentlemen, costly dressed, who shared a bottle of disgustingly strong herb liquor between themselves. For hours, I watched the going-ons and the various people out tonight. To be honest, it was extremely interesting, and for the first time, I found myself ignoring the outside of the tram, not looking for weird locations, but instead just watching people. It was about 2 a.m. when the tram grew emptier, and she entered. She was the most gorgeous woman I'd ever seen, and my eyes grew wide. Her hazel eyes wandered over the tram in search of a seat, and I watched as she brushed aside a rebellious strand of brown hair that dangled in front of her face. For a second, all the noise in the tram died down, and everyone seemed to stare at her. Then, slowly, normalcy returned, or at least a sense of normalcy, for she was still the center of attention. The strangest thing, however, was how plainly she was dressed. Instead of a fancy evening dress, she wore a pair of roughed-up jeans and a white tank top. This made her even hotter. As her well-measured steps led through the tram, I couldn't help but stare at her. I told myself to look away, to stop being a creep, but I couldn't. This girl, whoever she was exactly my type. A fantasy become flesh. Then she noticed me. In an instant, I averted my eyes. Shit, you're acting way too fucking creepy. I did my best to just turn away and stare at the window, but then, only a few moments later, she was right there, standing next to my row of seats. "Hey there, is this seat available, or is it reserved for your backpack?" she asked, giving me a hint of a smile. Oh, Jesus fucking Christ, I can die happy. Oh, yeah, it is. I mean, it's reserved, not reserved, available. I mean, just let me get this out of the way. With that, I heaved the heavy backpack over to my side, and then, with all the force I could muster, pushed it between my legs. It barely fit, and I was damn sure I just ruined a fair bit of the food still inside, but I didn't care. I'd have thrown the damn thing out of the tram if it meant having a short chat with this girl. She watched my efforts, slightly giggling, before she sat down next to me. "So, are you at the party?" she asked. Her voice was pure seduction, and the smile she gave made my blood rush through my veins. No, I'm... Shit, what the hell do I tell her? If I told her what I was really doing, she'd probably think I was the biggest freaking idiot on the planet Earth. Which, honestly, wasn't too far from the truth. "No, I'm going somewhere," I eventually brought out. She mused. "Why don't the two of us go somewhere together? To be honest, I'm really bored tonight, and I'm looking for a bit of fun, you know?" After she'd said this, she gave me a little wink. Believe me, I wanted to. I fucking wanted to, but I just couldn't give up like that. Could I? Not on day fucking 5. Then she put her hand on my leg, caressing it slightly. "Why not take a chance for once?" At that moment, I was done. Fuck the long ride, fuck the tram, and fuck my friends who'd most likely call me out for giving up. I didn't care anymore. The tram rumbled on and then came to a stop. At that moment, she got off her seat and held out her hand toward me. Without even thinking, I took it and got up myself. Yet, before I could leave my row of seats behind, something unexpected happened. Some idiot who must have sat behind us, and was on his way towards the tram door as well, bumped right into her. Her hand was torn from mine, and she stumbled a few steps forward. I was about to yell at the fucker, but at that moment, something changed. She changed. For the shortest of moments, the beautiful girl in front of me wavered, for lack of a better word. In an instant, her brown hair and hazel eyes vanished, and something not human replaced her face, and comprising nothing but bone and scar tissue. I cringed back, almost toppled over my seat, and crashed hard against the tram's side. "Sorry about that," I heard from behind me, and when I turned, I saw a scruffy-looking older dude. When I turned back towards the girl, she was all hazel eyes and brown hair again. "Are you okay? Are you still coming?" she asked, but this time the illusion wasn't complete. For a moment, her face was replaced by what I now recognize as some sort of beak, and the hand she held out to me was nothing but a twisted set of claws. Once more, I pushed myself against the side of the tram. When she saw my reaction, her entire act fell apart. Her smile was gone. Her eyes had turned hard, and an expression of pure and utter anger came over her face. For a second, I thought the thing might throw itself at me, but then she just walked off. I couldn't help but stare after her, after it. "Wouldn't look for too long or you'll fall for it again," the scruffy guy said. "Care if I take a seat?" I measured him up for a moment, wondering if this was another trick, another ploy by some strange thing to get close to me. But when I saw no sign of ill will on his face, I nodded. "Thanks, I guess," I eventually brought out. The dude gave me a shrug, and when he did, a rain of dandruff descended from his head, and I couldn't help but inch a tad bit away from him. Now that I had time to get a better look at him, I saw he wasn't just scruffy. He was dirty, his clothes nothing but rags, and he smelled way worse than I did after 5 days on the tram. He had to be a hobo, I reasoned, probably on the tram for the night to catch some sleep in a warm place. "How did you know about this thing?" The guy chuckled, but then started to talk. When he did, I could smell disgustingly heavy liquor on his breath. "When you live where I do, you catch on to a thing or two. Seen it before. Almost fell for it myself once." "What is it?" "Haven't got the slightest clue. It sure is nothing good, I can tell you that." As I stared ahead, I saw that the woman had already found another guy, and was seductively talking to him. A moment later, I watched as she pressed her mouth against his, and couldn't help but shudder. "What is it you see?" the guy next to me asked. "What do you mean?" "The thing, what's it look like to you?" "Brown hair, hazel eyes, wearing jeans and a tank top." The guy next to me laughed. "See, that's how it gets ya. Knows what type of women we like, and shows it to us." "What's she look like to you, then?" I asked, giving him a slight grin. "A blonde with a killer pair of knockers." I burst out laughing when I heard this. Then I watched as the woman got off her seat, the guy she'd sat with trailing after her. I was about to get up to do something, but for just a second she shot me a threatening glance. One that made me freeze. A moment later, she'd dragged the guy from the tram. My eyes wandered to the station, towards the two of them. The guy was still grinning like an idiot, enamored by what he assumed to be the girl of his dreams. As they went on their way, I could see their shadows, cast by a nearby streetlight. His was normal, but hers was entirely different. It was a giant, lurking thing, something akin to a sort of bird, a bird of prey. The image of a vulture appeared in my mind, a lurking, preying vulture ready to devour its prey. Then the tram drove off, leaving the two of them behind, and the guy to whatever terrible fate the creature had in mind for him. "So what's your deal?" The guy ended the silence. "What do you—" "Been sitting here with no intention of getting out, carrying that damn thing with you. You sure don't look like party people to me." I guess I really struck out. In a few words, I told him about the long ride, and that I was already on day 5. When he heard this, his face grew dark. "Doing a stupid thing like that," he mumbled, shaking his head. "Staying on here for so long, even overnight." "Aren't you doing the same thing? I mean, aren't you on here to catch some sleep?" "God, no. I might live on the streets, but I ain't stupid. I'm just on to get away from those damn party people. Can't sleep with all that shouting and whatnot. I stayed on here once, but it's not worth it. Not with all the crazy shit happening." "What do you mean?" He stared at me for a moment, probing me. "Sure, you must have noticed them by now. Them people who just up and vanish. Strange creatures like that one and those places who shouldn't be there, but somehow are. Like this one." With that, he pointed outside, and I saw we were just passing another unlocation. This time, it was a scrapyard. It was a huge, constricted place, looking almost labyrinthian. As I focused on it more, I saw its giant heaps comprised nothing but old, rusty toys, all stacked upon one another. I shuddered when I saw strange figures shuffling around between these heaps, figures that seemed as mechanical as the rest of the place. Eventually, I gave the guy a nod and began telling him what I'd seen over the past days. When I told him about the waving man, he cut me off. "You did what?" he asked in shock. Like I said, I waved back. Why? "God damn it! Tell you what," he started, leaning over towards me, staring deep into my eyes. "You better get off this damn thing right now! Right here!" "Why? What's gonna happen? What's he gonna do?" "Ain't gonna do a damn thing, but he knows you're on. And now you've seen him. He's marked you now. Others know as well." "What others?" "God knows what they are. Might be ghosts, might be demons. But they sure are trouble. As I said, best to call it quits about your damn game and get off." I wish I could do that, but to tell you the truth, I'm prepared to see this one through. Once more, the guy shook his head. "Wouldn't do it if I were you. But I guess you made up your mind." After he'd said this, he got off his seat. "Well, time to get going. I sure don't like taking my chances." I gave him a nod. "Well, thanks for the warning. Hey, hold on. Here, for saving me." With that, I handed him my last can of beer. The guy's face lit up the moment he saw it. He almost tore it from my hands, and it vanished in one of the many pockets of his jacket. "Tell you again, get off while you still can." Then he made his way towards the tram doors, and once the tram came to a halt, he left it behind. Outside, I saw him looking at me, giving me a well-meaning nod before he walked off. For the next hour, I sat in my seat thinking. He'd said I'd been marked. But what exactly did that mean? I thought he was just some crazy hobo, but it was clear he knew what was going on here. And he knew more than I did. I cursed myself for not having asked him to stay on longer and to share more information. Well, nothing I can do about it now. So instead, I typed out my experiences of day 5. It's close to 5 in the morning now, and I'm getting tired. But I don't think it's a good idea to go to sleep. At least, not until the sun is up. That's it for now. I'll see you all tomorrow. At least, I hope I do. Hey there, everyone. Sorry for the lack of updates. After what happened on day 6, I just needed a few days to get myself together and to get some well-needed rest. Things got out of hand, more so than on any other day before, and I'm more than lucky to even write this, but more about that later. Let me start day 6 by telling you about my encounter with a familiar face. It was the old man I'd met on day 2. This time, he wasted no time and sat down next to me right away. "Guess you're still on here," he said. "Same as you. Guess we both enjoy riding the tram," I brought out, half-jokingly. "It's not all fun and games, young man, but I'm sure you know that by now, given how long you've been on." "Sure do," I said, laughing. The old man didn't join in, but gave me an expectant stare. And so I told him about my experiences over the past course of days. When I told him about the strange, undescriptive people and the station I'd encountered on day 4, his expression changed. It became one of sadness, of longing, but he didn't say anything. Eventually, I told him what had happened the day prior, about my encounter with the waving man, and what the homeless guy had told me. "That man's right indeed. You've stayed on for far too long. As I told you, certain things might notice you, and now they have." Once more, I felt a shiver running down my spine. I was in for it now, wasn't I? "You better stop this madness now and get off. It's not worth it, young man." Well, to be honest, I want to, but this is day 6. And I told myself I'm going to see this through. There's no way I can give up now. When the old man heard this, he just shook his head. "Let me repeat myself. It's not worth it. But I guess your mind's set. I hope you don't end up regretting your choice." With that, he got up from his seat, walked off, and settled down in the tramcar ahead of me. For a few more minutes, he sat there, but the moment I took a glance outside, he was gone. The next couple of hours were rather quiet. It was Saturday afternoon, and only a few people here and there entered the tram on their way to the inner city area. The moment we left it behind, I soon found myself all alone again. We'd just made it to the outskirts of the city when the tram doors opened behind me, and I was greeted by loud yelling and laughter. A second later, a group of 6 kids rushed past me. They were so fast they seemed like nothing but colorful blurs. They began causing a ruckus in the tram car, then rushed back past me, giggling. I began rubbing my temples and was about to yell at them to knock it off when one of them slapped me on the shoulder. "You're it," he called out before he and his friends rushed past me once more. I watched as they hurried to the tram car ahead, and how they tried their best to hide themselves. I thought nothing of it, and couldn't help but sigh a little when I saw one of them crawling below a set of seats, and another trying to hide himself behind the ticket machine. Others, however, were doing strange things, impossible things, and I found myself shivering in my seat. I watched as one kid almost folded into himself, becoming smaller and smaller, while another one seemed to melt between 2 seats, vanishing. I sat there, closed my eyes, and then opened them again. By then, all 6 kids were gone, yet every once in a while I could still hear muffled giggling. I just sat there, trying my best to ignore it. This is just happening because I'm all alone on the tram. All those things, they only ever happen when I'm completely alone. Just wait till those other people get back on, and then it will be over. My thoughts were interrupted when I felt a hand on my shoulder. "The kids are waiting," the hand's owner cackled from behind me. I froze. Without moving, I took a glance at the hand resting on my shoulder. It was old and wrinkly, but its fingers were too long. Much too long. A moment later, when the sun pushed itself out from behind the clouds, I saw the shadow of whatever was standing behind me. It was a giant, monstrous shadow that seemed to spread over the entire tram car, stretching further and further. "Well, why aren't you going?" No, I didn't get to finish my excuse. The creature's hand closed around my shoulder, and I felt its nails dig into my skin. I cringed in pain, but kept my mouth shut. Don't scream. Don't move. Yet with each passing moment, the creature squeezed harder, and I felt its nails dig deeper into my flesh. Finally, I saw the tram approaching the next station, and I could see a group of people waiting for it. When the tram came to a rest, I was released. "Let's go, kids," the thing behind me screeched, and right away all 6 kids reappeared, jumping out from behind seats and from a place where they couldn't possibly have been. For the first time, I could make out their faces, and I wish I hadn't. They were nothing but mockeries, estimations of children's faces that were only half right. What made it even worse, however, was that I somehow recognized them. In the deepest corners of my mind, I knew I'd seen them before. I couldn't help but shiver again as they raced past me. And then they were gone. When the tram moved again, driven by a strange sense of curiosity, I turned around. What I saw outside was a group of kids, standing around an old lady who seemed to smile down at them. A second later, she turned towards me, and her eyes found mine. In an instant, her face changed. What had been a kind, smiling face before became nothing but an angry, twisted visage. My breath caught in my throat, and I jerked back around, more than happy to leave those ghastly children and their guardian behind. This, however, wasn't the only scary thing that happened during the day. As always, the same recurring passengers entered the tram. By now, they'd long become an almost normal part of the long ride. Just another strange thing amongst a plethora of them. Yet when my eyes followed one of them, an older woman, I noticed the change right away. She wasn't minding her own business like she usually did. That day I found her frowning slightly, measuring me up almost as if she was probing me. I remembered what that homeless man had said. He's marked you, and now others know as well. I took a deep breath and averted my eyes, trying my best to ignore her. but I could feel her continuing to stare at me until she got off the tram. Only a few stations later, she got on again, and once more she stared at me. I didn't look at her directly, only took a single sideways glance, but I could have sworn her frown was getting deeper. This behavior was true for every single one of them, and like her, they too became angrier with each iteration. It made me feel restless, and more than a bit anxious. I felt trapped, haunted by multiple pairs of eyes staring at me and only me. When it became evening, the bustle of partygoers started again, and for the first time in hours I felt myself slightly relaxing. Under the constant bustle of people entering and leaving the tram, I felt hidden. And yet I knew they were still there. I could still feel their glances, even amongst the general chaos that ruled over the tram. Finally, though, as the tram grew emptier once more, I found almost a dozen of them staring at me. It also seemed that under the cover of the partygoers, they'd gotten closer. By now, they were all in the same tramcar as me, and seemed to have encircled me. At that point, I couldn't take it anymore, and I finally spoke up. "What the hell do you want from me?" I called out. Yet nothing changed. I got no answer. They just continued to stare at me. Before long, however, they reminded me of the guy in dark clothes I'd encountered on day 3. They didn't just sit in their seats anymore, didn't just stare at me, but were leaning forward, their faces distorted by an unadulterated rage. Their hands were on their seats, their feet shuffled over the floors as if in anticipation of something. The worst, however, was that with each station, more of them entered. If it's just one set of eyes staring at you, you can ignore it. You can handle it. But when it's more than a dozen, you just can't. With everything I'd heard, with all the warnings I'd received, I knew something was going to happen. It just seemed that they were waiting for something. In that instant, fear washed over me, raw and hot. Fear that soon turned into panic, and I finally decided that was it. I wouldn't just stay on here until God knows what would happen to me. Fuck the long ride. Fuck the tram. This is over. I closed my hand around my backpack. Was about to get up, but at that moment their angry glances changed. They turned to smiles. Hungry smiles. The same feeling I'd had when I tried to flee the guy in black clothes came over me. If I got up now, they'd come for me. That's what they were waiting for, wasn't it? I just stood there at my seat, my hand closed around my backpack strap, unable to move. Then the tram turned a corner, a bend that shouldn't be there, and we encountered another unlocation. Half defeated and knowing I was trapped either way, I plopped down on my seat again and stared outside with a feeling of miserable wonder. The entire area outside was covered in nothing but small buildings, shanties comprising nothing but rubble and trash. They seemed to have been put up without rhyme or reason, were almost growing from the ground like mushrooms. Between them, I saw things moving, twisted things I could tell were not human. Yet it wasn't merely this shanty town we'd arrived at. No, they were all part of another location, were built around it as if they were part of an infection that spread further and further. The dim red light that flooded the tram was enough, and one glance ahead told me that we were once more approaching Club Red. No, I thought. Not this place again. I hoped the tram would pass it by, that we'd return to reality, that other people would enter the tram again, and I'd be able to be free. Instead, the tram approached a wide, arching opening, and then drove forward, and straight into Club Red itself. What I saw in there was utterly surreal. All I'd seen on Night 4 was the building's exterior, and it was nothing but a taste of the insanity the place contained. It was nothing but a cesspool, an amalgamation of sin. All around us, the same strange, psychedelic non-music was blaring. I saw stalls everywhere. They were offering drinks and food, but also other things. In some of them, I thought I saw bound humans, or things that might once have been human. Here and there, people were having sex, copulating with creatures that weren't human. In other places I saw orgies, strange rituals, people praying to disgusting, twisted idols, and so much more. Even here, even inside, the place defied the laws of physics. The walls were covered in doorways, all connected by a mad network of stairs. But stairs that shouldn't work, and yet they did. It was as if the works of M.C. Escher had become reality. Then the strange, fascinated trance that had come over me was broken, and I jerked back as I remembered where I was and what was happening to me. While I'd been staring outside and I'd not given them any attention, it seemed all the recurring passengers had inched closer towards me, and were now surrounding me. I opened my mouth to throw them another set of insults, to tell them to stay the fuck away, when the tram's doors opened. Instantly, the air was filled with a disgustingly sweet odor, a stench so oppressive it almost made me cough. It smelled of strange spices, of body fluids, but also blood. Yet this wasn't the worst. I noticed something approaching the tram, and before I could even react, the creature had entered it. Its limbs were bent at strange angles, as if they had too many joints within them, limbs that sprouted from places they shouldn't. I watched as its head pushed itself forward, its neck stretching further and further as it scanned the interior of the tram. And then, one step at a time, the monstrosity made its way through the tram on its spidery limbs, slowly getting closer to me. I just sat there, mouth open in shock, not able to do anything but stare ahead. No, it couldn't be. Why was this thing here? Why the hell was it back? Cold sweat broke out all over my body, and I just sat there, my hands holding onto the seat in front of me. Then I began to shake uncontrollably. Oh God, I thought as I watched it getting closer. It's coming for me. This time, it's actually coming for me. By now, the people around me were all grinning. I understood now. This was what they'd been waiting for. It seemed almost as if they weren't able to do anything to me, weren't able to hurt me, but this thing could. As I watched the twisted creature take another step, as it stalked forward in my direction on its spidery limbs, I freaked out. I screamed in terror, jumped off my seat, and dashed for the tram doors. I didn't want to go out there. Hell, I shouldn't. But I wasn't in control of my body. It was nothing but pure primal fear that drove me on. But then the doors closed right in front of me. For a mad second, I clawed at them, tried to pry them open with sheer force. But before I could, the tram started to move again, trapping me inside. Fuck. What the fuck could I do? Then, with no other option, I rushed to the back of the tram, praying we'd return to reality, to my city, to another station that would allow me to get away. Outside, we left Club Red behind, but then continued on through the ever-extending shantytown. Fuck, why aren't we back yet? I sat in the back, huddled together behind a seat, trying to keep the panic at bay, but one glance forward made it impossible. By now, the disgusting creature had almost reached the last tramcar, and for a moment its eyes focused on me. Its jaw fell open, unhinged like that of a snake, and a distorted bout of guffawing laughter escaped from it. At that moment, I couldn't fight the panic anymore. I jumped up, my hand closing around one of the glass breakers, and then, with all the force I could muster, I swung it against the window. It crashed against the glass again and again before the window shattered. A moment later, I threw myself outside. I landed hard on the asphalt. My hands and knees exploded with pain. I felt the skin of my hands being scraped away and felt my knees crunch hard against the asphalt. Then I felt myself being propelled forward, rolling over the street. I heard a horn, heard brakes screeching, but I somehow avoided the oncoming car by a hair's breadth. As I lay on the ground, I was panting and in terrible pain. When I finally looked up, all was normal. There was no hint of any unlocation. Instead, I was on an entirely normal street in my city. By now, the driver of the car had jumped out, his face a mixture of anger and worry, and a moment later the tram driver followed. While the car driver asked if I was okay, the the tram driver began laying into me. He called me crazy for destroying the window and for jumping off. He spat at me, accusing me of being drunk, on drugs, or insane. Instead of reacting to any of these words, I stared back at the tram. It was empty. No one was inside. None of the reoccurring passengers, no twisted, spidery monsters. I could only listen as the tram driver explained to the other man what had happened. I'd apparently jumped off my seat, screaming and freaking out before I'd broken a window and jumped out, even though I'd been entirely alone on the tram. I opened my mouth to tell them what had happened, but then closed it again. What could I even tell them? In the end, all I could do was to drag my battered body to the sidewalk and sit down. By now, the tram driver had called the police and informed them about what I'd done. To be honest, I could have tried to run, to get away, but in the state I was in, it seemed impossible. As I sat there, I thought back to the old man, to the vision of his torn apart and broken body. If that car had hit me, something similar would have most likely happened to me. Was that what this had all been about? Had all those people and that creature been nothing but visions to drive me over the edge, to get me to go crazy and end up being run over? When the police arrived, they were quick to take the statements of both drivers before they spoke to me as well. Then they took me to the station and questioned me for almost an hour. In the end, I told them I'd had a panic attack, that I couldn't breathe, and I thought I'd die of a heart attack unless I got off the tram. They were skeptical, to say the least, and subjected me to not only an alcohol, but also a drug test. When both came out negative, I was essentially let off the hook, but not scot-free. They charged me with vandalism, and I'd have to pay for the tram window I destroyed, which would come to almost €1,000. They also told me I should consult professional help and see myself checked in. I mumbled a thanks and was eventually allowed to leave. And so, the long ride ended on day 6, in the early hours of the morning. What I'm now left with is nothing but a tale. A tale I can share only here, because you guys are the only people willing to believe any of the things I've seen. Thank you all for staying with me, for your thoughts on what happened, and for following me along on this crazy adventure. I'd have never thought things would get out of hand like this, and there are still so many questions I'll probably never find answers for. Yet I'd also like to give you guys a word of warning, or to reiterate those given to me multiple times. Don't do it. There are things out there who wait for people who linger, who stay in the same place for too long. They're dangerous things. Things that will find you and will come for you. And maybe, just maybe, you won't be as lucky as me. And you won't get away. Today's video was supported by patrons like Mark from Earth, Crimson Muse, Joy Burton, Diane Showers, Mark Sewall, Cheryl James, Pick Your Sticker, Teddy Dog, Clue 404, Mamakato, Dante Kincaid, Zarin Ray, Angela Donovan, Blarian50, Devin Kyle, Timothy Baird, Ajeti, Bert Turner, Majani Espinal, Michael Pierce, Big Joe, Carrie Harkonnen, LaDonna Spivey, Scott Tanaka, Tom Stewart, Sherman Davis, Bryce Shelton, Susan McClendon, Elise Batiste, Lisa and the Cult Jam, Open Circuit, Fabulavore, Raymond Jaggers, That Darn Fox, Raison Detra, Kai Gaming 99, Windy Burns, The Wendigo, Michael Squishy Park, The Gemstar, Vault 77 Citizen, Puppy Dan, and Clovis Wolf. If you'd like to help support the channel, please consider joining my Patreon page at patreon.com/Jordan Group Horror. As a patron, you'll get access to bonus videos, content, and a Discord channel. You'll be credited at the end of every video going forward, and if you decide to stay for 3 months, I'll name a character after you which will be featured in the next Hollow's End story. Links to join the Patreon are in the description. Thanks everyone for listening. Please like, subscribe, and comment to help the channel continue to grow, and see you again next time at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Hope you have a great night.